Good afternoon, Dolphins fans. Welcome to another episode of On the Fin Side with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all of our social media outlets, as well as finfanatic.com and the Fansided Network. Thanks for joining us here. We are 2 days away from full training camp for the Dolphins. We are 20 days away from preseason, from the Dolphins' first preseason game, and 49 days away from the Dolphins' opening weekend at home against the New England Patriots. Paul, looking at just the structure of the team and how things are coming together, it's getting pretty exciting here in preseason. And I said the other day that my stat line expectations for Tua Tagovailoa are 350 for 506, 4277 or 4227 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. And the reason I came up with that number is that is the exact stat line adjusted from 16 to 17 games that Jimmy Garoppolo had in 2019 when the 49ers went to the Super Bowl with a top three defense. And it has to go hand in hand with Tua and this defense performing at a top five level here, not just early on, but throughout the entire season.
It does. And 4,200, it's so funny that you and I both literally hit on that 4,200 yardage wise number. The toughest thing for me with him is looking at, I want his touchdown to interception ratio to at least be 2 or 3 to 1. And I'm not going to give an exact number because I do think we're going to be a run first team, despite all the weapons we have at receiver, at tight end, receiving out of the backfield, et cetera. So the touchdown interception ratio is probably the better gauge for me as far as the touchdowns go, just because, yes, I expect them to get, 18 to 20 plus touchdowns, but it's a hard number to set in stone with Raheem Mostert, Chase Edmonds, Myles Gaskin, Zaquandre White, Alec Ingold in that backfield, as well as guys like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, who can take some reverses and things like that. And I actually expect Cedric Wilson to throw a touchdown pass or two this season.
Why is Cedric Wilson throwing a touchdown? Has he ever done that?
He is 5 for 5 in his career throwing the ball, and he throws a beautiful ball. He literally doesn't have an incompletion in his career on trickery type plays.
I'll be damned. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think when we first signed him, I brought that up real quick because I thought it was kind of funny. I'm pretty sure he's got 100% completion percentage throughout his career. I mean, it's 5 attempts, but still, he's made the most of those attempts.
And before we get into the defense, just to stay right there, the unpredictability of the offense is what I'm looking forward to most. And it's been a while since we've recited this stat, but last year, the 49ers were the number one team in the NFL as far as how often they used pre-snap motion. And it was over 80%. The next team was somewhere around 60%. So you can bet Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are going to be in motion literally every play. So that's, and it has to go hand in hand with the defense. And Paul, looking at last year, if you take a look at the Dolphins' overall rankings for the year, 15th in yards allowed, 16th in points, 14th against the run, 16th against the pass, 6th in sacks, 9th in turnovers. They look like very middle of the pack defensive numbers, but when you start to peel back the layers, you can basically slice the success and the lack of success for the Dolphins defense right down the middle, because in the first 8 games, they were 29th in the NFL in points per game. And then the last 9, they were second. Yards, dead last in the first 8 games. The last 9 games, they were third. Pass yards, they were 31st in the NFL in the first 8 games. In the last 9, they were fourth. Sacks, 12th in the NFL in the first 8, and then first in the NFL with 36 sacks over the last 9 games. Interceptions, 25th in their first 8, and third with 11 interceptions in their final 9. Really a tale of 2 seasons here, and that's the big thing. The Dolphins have a really difficult first 4 games this year against the Patriots, the Bills, the Bengals, and the Ravens in no particular order. So they've got to have without question, a much better start this year.
They do. And that's something that I know you and I talked extensively about this during the season last year. I was pissed off the first 8 games because they took what they had built in 2020 and done well in 2020. They supplemented it during the offseason before the 2021 season. And then instead of using that dancing drunken cover zero style defense, the unpredictable defense, the one where you didn't know who was coming, who was dropping, the one that had teams literally seeing ghosts. You go back to Justin Herbert's rookie year, they were within striking distance and stopped throwing the ball because they were so afraid to throw it because Herbert couldn't read the defense. And then they came out of the gate last year with this supplemented personnel that was set up well to complement what they had done the previous year and do even better. And they ran the most vanilla defense I can remember seeing from the Dolphins for the first 8 games. And then all of a sudden they realized in week 9 against Lamar Jackson, like, shoot, we better do something different. And then they completely went back to it, unlocked the cheat code to defeat Lamar Jackson, and really ran the table for the most part down the stretch without an offensive identity and an offensive game plan, really. Yes, they had a game plan, but it didn't really count as one. That put the defense behind the 8 ball, and they still were able to respond because they were so unpredictable and aggressive. You could see the guys having fun now. And that's where I was even more pissed off in the games following the Baltimore game, because really that boils down to what we were saying all season last year, that there were flaws fundamentally in coaching and strategy from the Dolphins last year that really kept this team out of the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say, to be fair, that it needs to be mentioned too that after that, in those final 9 games, the Dolphins faced Tyrod Taylor, they faced Zach Wilson twice, they faced Cam Newton, they faced Mike Glennon, they faced Ian Book. That
Zach
I do
Wilson
think
Zach Wilson once, Joe Flacco once, I think it was.
Yeah, you're correct. You're correct. Thank you. So that does have to be factored in too. But the other side of that coin is when you look at the Dolphins at the beginning of last year on defense. I mean, they played Josh in those first 8 games. They faced Josh Allen twice. They faced Matt Ryan. They faced Tom Brady. They faced Derek Carr. So difficult quarterbacks in those first 8 games. But I really think that the deciding factor between just overall, when you take the competition out of it, in the first 8 games, Jalen Phillips really wasn't doing a whole heck of a lot in his first 8 games. Javon Holland didn't come on until the second half of the year. They weren't, like you said, being nearly as aggressive as they were the previous year. And the overwhelming opinion in the second half of the year wasn't just the competition, but that they were saying, players on defense were saying, Emmanuel Ogbah said this, a few other guys said this, they were getting back to what they were doing the previous year, and which was being aggressive, and you saw that in the alignments too.
Yeah, it's literally the first 8 games. You could look at the defense. They all just walked up to the line of scrimmage and went, I go here. That's where I go. You block me. Like, that's what it felt like. It was this super – it almost felt like – and I hate to keep using the Chargers because the Chargers are a fantastic team. The Chargers are probably going to be in the playoffs this year. But I go back to when previous coach of the Chargers, now I think he's with Detroit,
Anthony
Lynn.
Yeah.
When he had the Chargers, they had a talent level that exceeded the scheme, because you remember talking about leading up to that game. I'm like, this is like the most basic scheme ever of just, I go there, you stop me. Like that's what their offensive identity was. That's what their defensive identity was. And you could see guys just like, dude, this sucks. If, and you've got to set your players up to be able to win their matchups. And Miami's defense and their personnel was set up for that, and they just didn't do it, even if they were going to have some growing pains with Javon Holland and Jalen Phillips rotating in and out. Like, you put Emmanuel Ogbah in a position where he wasn't able to be as successful as he could. You put Christian Wilkins. I mean, every player on this defense performs better in that defense that they set up and schemed for the previous year and set up in the offseason for 2021 to do. And then they just came out and said, nah, we're just going to run this basic nonsense.
Yeah, they were a lot more unpredictable, and they've got to keep it that way. And what's so important this year too, and I said this before the Dolphins hired Mike McDaniel, is that my fear is that with firing Brian Flores, was that they were going to bring in a new defensive coordinator. They weren't going to re-sign Emmanuel Ogbah. They were going to bring in a guy that's going to want to do his own thing, because 90% of the time when you switch head coaches, that's what happens. So I'm really happy Mike McDaniel came in here, kept Josh Boyer, kept the same personnel. The Dolphins didn't lose anybody on defense. They lost Justin Coleman as their biggest loss, which is incredible to say. They're bringing all their backup linebackers back, for Christ's sake. So yeah, I mean, I think there's no excuse for this defense to not pick up where they left off here last year. So let's take a look at the positions, Paul. Defensive line. I mean, Emmanuel Ogbah last year had 20 quarterback hits and 10 passes deflected at defensive end. Has not happened in 5 or 6 years, I believe. Incredible work there. Jalen Phillips, a rookie, 8.5 sacks. Inside, Christian Wilkins, breakout season, probably a top 10 defensive tackle in the NFL now. And Zach Sealer, is getting the reputation as one of the more underrated overall players on defense in the NFL. And you've got Raekwon Davis back, who's going to be healthy at the start of the year, which was not the case last year either. So phenomenal defensive line. And now you add Melvin Ingram to the mix. I look at the edge spots and defensive tackle, and I say that this is a position that you're looking at an A- or an A as far as the grade on this positional group.
You are, and I think it's pretty much an easy A, especially when they get back to that defense like they should do out of the gate this year. And one of the guys that really came on down the stretch, and I didn't hear you mention him, so you may or may not have, but once they got to that more flexible defense based on his own skill set, was Adam Butler. He was a key cog in that defensive line rotation last year, between defending the run and being able to get into the backfield and rush the passer a little bit. And you mentioned Emmanuel Ogbah batting passes at the line of scrimmage. When they got to that unpredictable defense where you didn't know who was coming and who was dropping, the way the passing lanes shook out, like Christian Wilkins batted a crazy amount of passes. I think Raekwon Davis batted a few. Zach Sealer was batting passes. Adam Butler was batting passes. I think Miami, if I remember correctly, led the league down the stretch in batted balls at the line of scrimmage. And that wasn't, it was an insane number. It felt like at least 4 times a game you saw a ball getting sent back past the quarterback. Like they had Dikembe Mutombo along the defensive line, which was awesome to watch. And that's a frustrating thing when a quarterback can't count on the passing lanes being there when he first looks at the defense.
So, yeah, I mean, keeping with the defensive line, let's keep it at edge and defensive tackle. It looks like 4 guys are certainly locks to make the roster, and that's Ogbah, Phillips, Ingram, and Van Ginkel. I mean, Ingram would have to show he's 34 for there to be any doubt. But let's say, for argument's sake, let's say those 4 are on the team. And then at defensive tackle, you've got Wilkins, Raekwon Davis, Zach Sealer, and Adam Butler making the roster. It's pretty safe to say it'd be a shock if it were anything other than that. So I look at the competitions here, Paul, and if you're going to go one-on-one with these you may have John Jenkins going up against Benito Jones for that 4th defensive tackle spot if they keep one. Do you see them keeping 5 defensive tackles?
No.
Okay.
Because they've got the setup for their defense and the style of defense they have. I don't see that, because this defense, whether or not they get pressure from up front, which they do, manufactures a lot of pressure, utilizing their linebackers. And I could see them being more likely, if push came to shove, going to a setup where they had an extra linebacker or defensive back on the field. And on top of that, they've got guys along the edge that they can kick into the middle on a need basis and then bring somebody up if they have to, because Benito Jones is probably going to be on the practice squad. John Jenkins has no eligibility for that.
I've got to double check that, because they may have I think they changed the rules again. That's something I got to look into. But yeah, I mean, John Jenkins is definitely a favorite of Josh Boyer. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I also wouldn't have them keeping a 5th defensive tackle. Be interesting to see if they look at Jenkins and say, for a team that's got to win now, it's good to have somebody like that around. So, and the competitions are hard to see. That these are the biggest types of competitions we're seeing on defense. I counted 20 players just on defense that are either locks to make the roster or really close to being locks. Adam Butler and Adam Butler and Keon Cross and some of these other guys being, those guys who are, they're going to, even though they're backups, they're going to be on the team. So,
and they're going to play. That's the other thing. They're going to be backups, but they're going to play.
Yeah, they are. I mean, Keon Cross, you pay $3 or $4 million a year. He's definitely going to play. I mean, so yeah. And then at the edge spot, they brought back Brennan Scarlett. Didn't guarantee him too much money, but they did re-sign him. He was okay when he was on the field. He got hurt. And I see that. I see it being a two-man competition for that final roster spot with Brennan Scarlett and rookie 7th rounder Cameron Good. I don't know if you're making a 53-man roster. Do you have either one or both or none on the roster for you?
I like Brennan Scarlett, but I have a feeling Cameron Goody has that shot at it. And the other dark horse for me is probably Darius Hodge, because I think he did just as much as Brennan Scarlett did last year and showed a little bit more versatility.
Yeah, he was active for a couple of games last year. So yeah, he certainly factors into the competition there at the bottom of the roster too. At linebacker, one thing that makes this defense unique is the linebackers are undersized, so that if they show blitz and huddle up on the line, they're fast enough to drop back into passing lanes to do that too. And you're going to see 3 on the roster here for sure, or 4 off-ball linebackers on the roster. And that's Jerome Baker, Elandon Roberts, who basically got a fully guaranteed contract this year, and Duke Riley and Channing Tindall. Now, some may say that Duke Riley's not a lock. I have to think he is, because if, with Channing Tindall being a rookie, if you lose Jerome Baker in the middle of that defense at any time, you need to have at least the speed to replace him at that linebacker spot. Duke Riley, I thought, played very well in special teams last year. When he was on the field, he was a really good player too, a linebacker. I didn't see much drop off between him and Baker. Not saying he's as good as Baker, but I didn't see a lot of drop off. So I think he's a lock to make the roster there as the 4th guy.
So for me, one of the things I like about Duke Riley is he does have the versatility. I think he can play that edge pass rush linebacker well for the Dolphins if they choose to move him over there. And if we want to talk about speed and effectiveness out of that inside linebacker position, if Jerome Baker goes down, it's Elandon Roberts is probably going to be a backup, so he'd probably be the first one in. But the other guy that they've got on the inside that I don't love on the outside is the guy that got the last touchdown of the Dolphins 2021 season, and that's Sam Egovon. He's somebody I think that could step in, and then you could see Duke Riley possibly unseat that Brendan Scarlett, Darius Hodge, Cameron Good battle on the outside.
Yeah, I see Egovon. I've put him on the roster. I've put him off the roster. I see him battling kind of with, I take back what I said before. I see it as a competition between Scarlett, Egovon, and Good. And you're probably going to see 2 of those 3 make the roster. Maybe 1 out of the 3, but he's going to be certainly battling there in the bottom of the roster, because Egovon's, I believe he's a little bit older too. And then I think he's what, he's 28, 29 now. So
yeah, we got him out of the CFL. But again, it's Duke Riley's still in that. Duke Riley's not in that get comfy spot as far as that goes. It's Duke. I think Duke is still in that mix of fighting it out. He might be towards the front end of fighting it out there, but Duke is still fighting for his spot, where Baker, Tindall, and Roberts are locks to make the roster.
Yeah, I'd probably put Riley's odds a little bit higher than you, but I understand what you're saying. Egovon as well he'll actually be 30 at the end of this year. He'll be 30 in February. So he's getting up there, and I think that would certainly factor in as the roster cuts come down. But either way, I believe Egovon is going to be playing with somebody here in the NFL in 2022. Defensive back, you've obviously got the studs locked in place, and Byron Jones and Xavier Howard for the last 3 years. This has been my favorite part of the team. And it's awesome to open a preseason magazine and seeing 2 Dolphins wide receivers ranked in the top 20 and 2 Dolphins cornerbacks ranked in the top 20. And I said on Twitter this past week, any cornerback ranking that does not have Xavier Howard as a top 3 cornerback completely lacks credibility. I mean, maybe Jalen Ramsey, you want to put above X, that's fine. A healthy Jair Alexander, I could let that slide too. Maybe another. No, to me, that's it. And, you know, Howard, if you look at the last 2 years, going back to the Jacksonville game in 2020, you take that to the end of 2021 where he had the pick 6 against Mac Jones. I mean, how many games you got there? And X missed a game too, didn't he? So you got 14, 17. So in 31 games, he had 17 interceptions and 3 forced fumbles. Like this guy is making the biggest game-changing play at least once every 2 games. Like nobody can touch what he has done as far as turnovers. And yeah, he doesn't blank his receiver every single week, but other than Mike Evans and Chris Godwin this past year against the Bucs, where Tom Brady was picking apart everybody on the defense, what was his worst game? I mean, maybe that big catch allowed to Kyle Pitts, but other than that, no. I mean, this is, to me, still the best cornerback tandem in the NFL. And then you factor in Nick Needham as the nickel guy, best trio in the NFL too.
Well, and then you've got several other guys that can drop down into that dime spot. And, you've got Verone McKinley, who's coming in as a safety that could potentially drop down to that dime spot. You've got Brandon Jones that's going to come in and possibly drop down to that dime spot and give you a lot of different looks with the personnel that they've got out there. And a guy that, look, he's probably going to start the year on the practice squad, but a guy I really, really like, and he comes from the Texas A&M School of Commerce as an undrafted free agent. That's Kader Kohou. He's got a lot of burst. He's got a lot of speed. He's got a lot of athleticism. He caused a lot of turnovers in college, whether it was interceptions or forced fumbles or fumble recoveries. And he's a very sticky corner. So he's somebody that I could fight for a roster spot when push comes to shove. And I'm curious to see what happens with Igbinoghene. That seems to be one of the biggest talks of coming into training camp, because at the end of the day, I think we talked about it. There's, anywhere from 18 to 20 locks on this defensive side of the ball. So there aren't a lot of spots, and Igbinoghene needs to step up and have his football skills match his athleticism.
Yeah, and we're hearing good things about Igbinoghene at this point, but we heard the same things a year ago today that, hey, in mini camp, this guy was a star. In training camp, he goes in there and this looks like a much improved player. I would categorize it in 2020, he was unplayable. In 2021, he was bad. So there was some improvement. So maybe you get that leap in the 3rd season. And look, Igbinoghene was barely 20 years old when the Dolphins drafted him. He's still been terrible, but you never know just based on that age. And the same goes for Austin Jackson. They've been bad. They weren't good draft picks. But that age certainly has to factor in. But Paul, to piggyback on what you're saying there, to me, I see 5 locks at cornerback, 3 at safety. You've got Xavier Howard, Byron Jones, Nick Needham, Keon Crossan, and Noah Igbinoghene. And the reason for Igbinoghene is that, he's on a rookie contract. You're not saving anything or not saving much by cutting him. So you could say maybe he's not a mortal lock, but he would have to be, to me, the 6th or 7th worst cornerback on this roster. There would have to be 6 or 7 cornerbacks above him in the pecking order for him to actually get the axe.
Yeah, but you know what? I do like Trill Williams. I do like Kader Kohou. I do like Elijah Hamilton and Elijah Campbell. Like, they have a lot of talented corners on this team. And Igbo needs to step up. He needs to find his niche, because end of the day, when there's 18 to 20 locks on the defensive side of the ball, and you don't have a path to the field and you don't have a role, it hurts to part ways, but the Dolphins do have room to do so if he doesn't step up this preseason.
Yeah, or it could be a situation where he's traded for a very late draft pick. We see that sometimes with 1st round busts as well.
Conditional 7th.
Yeah, that would that'd be a kick in the nuts. But yeah, I mean, yeah.
Well, is it more? And that's the thing. A lot of people sit back and yeah, it'd be a little bit of a kick in the nuts, but is it more of a kick in the nuts than having him sit on this roster just because you made a mistake? So you're just going to sit there and stick with your mistake. That's where, we're talking year 3 and you haven't shown a damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't shown a damn thing. Matter of fact, the only thing I can remember from Igbinogany is him getting burned once and him committing a stupid penalty. That's
yeah. And he got, that game against Jacksonville where Byron Jones and Xavier Howard were out. Trevor Lawrence throws for over 300 yards, just one of 2 times he did that last year.
Mm-hmm.
Same Trevor Lawrence that went 6 games without a touchdown pass. Dolphins win that game easy with Byron Jones and Xavier. Now, they still should have won that game, but you put Noah Igbinoghene out there and he can't cover Marvin Jones. I mean, or Marvin Jones made a lot of contested catches against him. So, yeah, I mean, that competition, two competitions I'm looking for a cornerback, Keon Crossan against Noah, and also Trill Williams against really the rest of the field here, and Kohu being that top guy, because with Kader Kohu, what we need to keep in mind too is that the Dolphins gave him a 6-figure signing bonus to be here as an undrafted free agent. As a comparison, the last 2 times I've seen him give him anything above 65 grand was to Tyshawn Render a couple of years ago, who was on the practice squad, dressed for a couple of games, so he was on the team. And last year, Robert Jones, who did make the roster. He got the benefit of the doubt, and he got on the field against New England in the final game and looked pretty promising. So Kader Kohu, they obviously think a lot of him. He's a toolsy cornerback. Trill Williams is also a toolsy quarterback, height, weight, speed, potential, and needs to be able to play special teams. So Trill Williams against Kohu is one competition I'm really looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, and one thing too is that's a dark horse with Kohu as well. Is Kohu had 453 return yards in his 4-year career. And he's going to get a little bit more runway because the level of competition that he faced in college was not at the highest level. So if he shows signs and sparks of something, I do expect him to get a little bit of an extended look, potentially into the beginning of the season. And he's one of those dark horse guys. And again, with given guys like Trill Williams on the roster, Trill Williams is a big enough body at this point that he can kick into safety as needed as well. So they may take, and Trill Williams may be also fighting against Clayton Fedulum as far as that goes. If he's somebody that they see as that could transition into that safety role and give you that boundary corner or nickel corner as needed.
Yeah, Trill Williams, his development's going to be interesting because, I mean, he was signed as an undrafted free agent by the Saints last year, and he was cut immediately. He was cut 2 days into minicamp. And then the Dolphins really made a point to not only sign him, but also keep him on the 53-man roster. But because of that potential. But now it's time to play. This is his 2nd year now. He's got his feet under him. He's got a year on the practice squad. It's time for him to get out there and perform here this year, whether that's at safety, whether that's a cornerback, whether it's a hybrid player, wherever. And that's where, if he doesn't show that he's made that next step up, I give the advantage to Kohu, because he is a little bit more of an unknown, and they thought enough of him to give him $100,000 in bonus. So, yeah, I mean, you've also got Elijah Hamilton, like you said. He just actually went on the POP list, so we'll see how that goes. Byron Jones did as well. More as kind of a precautionary at this point because of his injury last year. So hopefully there's nothing more to that. Quincy Wilson at cornerback, for any Florida Gators fans, he was actually a former high 2nd-round pick of the Colts a few years ago. Obviously has been a big disappointment, but a big, long cornerback. Has never quite had the speed though. So I'm not too high on him, but he was thought highly enough to be a 2nd-round pick just a couple of years ago. So
yeah,
we'll see there.
I look at the depth chart, and Byron Jones is a starter, and then they've got guys like Keon Crossan and Kader Kohu behind him, and then you look behind X and they put all those guys that we're talking about, they may not pan out, like Igbo and Quincy Wilson. It's like, all right, put them behind X. We'll never put them in the game anyway. Like,
yeah, that's true. At safety, Paul, you've got uh, Javon Holland and Brandon Jones starting. Eric Rowe is the third cornerback. I hope they keep Eric Rowe this year because, if you're going to cut him over $4 million, you're going to be looking for a player to replace him. And it's probably going to cost you $4 million. So I say keep Eric Rowe on the roster. And then you've got what may be a fascinating competition for one or two safety spots between what looks like three players. There's really nobody else in camp at the safety spot besides Clayton Fedulum, Veron McKinley, and returning safety Sheldrick Redwine. So I know we've wanted to get Fedulum off the roster here for years, but they are returning. There's, special teams coordinator here, Danny Crossman, and he's always been a Clayton Fedulum guy, and he's always made the roster. They've always paid him handsomely, and he's going to get a guaranteed $1 million this year, whether he makes the team or not.
I would gladly watch the Dolphins pay him $1 million to stay home. I would eat that in a heartbeat if I'm Greer. But no, like I like Sheldrick Redwine. I like Veron McKinley. Veron McKinley and Javon Holland have a good rapport together from college. And on top of that, it's you can't cut Eric Rowe. He's got a role on this defense, and it's pretty cool that Miami's set up where it's almost like three of the safeties already are starters because of the roles and the way they flex things between Javon Holland, Brandon Jones, and Eric Rowe.
I agree. And it's easy to look at the linebackers and say, well, they've got Jerome Baker starting. That's okay. But then they've got Andrew Van Ginkel and then Landon Roberts as their two other linebackers. Oh, that's not a great starting line, but really you only play two linebackers in the NFL. You're use five defensive backs over 70% of the time in this defense, and you use six of them over 50% of the time. So yeah, Nick Needham, Eric Rowe on the field a lot. You're going to see Nick Needham on the field. Good for him for getting, a $4 million extension. Certainly deserved. He's become one of the better nickel backs in the league. I saw two different publications that had him as a top 5 nickel back in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very accurate. So,
and Javon Holland's going to finish the year as a top 5 safety.
He played like it at the end of the last year, and hopefully there's no sophomore slump with him. I don't think there will be. No. A player that's that fast and that alert has really hit the ground running. He's so much faster than I thought he would be too. And that's wonderful to see. Somebody will come up and hit you, can get in the right position in passing lanes, but also play over the top. He is the emblem of the player that needed to step up when the Dolphins needed to be more unpredictable last year. And it started with the Ravens game. Hopefully it starts here in week 1. Paul, before we call it a day here, anything else?
One thing I want to put out there is some of these guys that we're talking about here, guys like Eric Rowe, guys like, Nick Needham or Keon Crossan, guys like Adam Butler. Those are guys that in other defenses might be just a guy. And the way Miami schemes this, some of the guys that you would expect to keep, some of the guys that are going to excel are going to be guys that might be just a guy in other defenses. But because of the way Miami flexes guys around, because of the way, you look at Javon Holland and Brandon Jones and the number of sacks that they had last season to go along with the passes defense and things like that. It's what's being asked of players in the different roles is different in Miami. It's why Jerome Baker down the stretch last year, when they flex back into that flexible cover zero defense, suddenly didn't he win defensive player of the month in December, if I remember correctly, Kat?
Sounds he won. No, I think that was the year before. I think that was the month that he sacked Pat Mahomes. He had like 7 sacks the year before, but he did play well. When the more aggressive the team becomes, the better Jerome Baker is. And it's like that for a lot of these guys. I mean, I'll reiterate, last year in the final 9 games, first in sacks with 36, third in interceptions with 11, second in points allowed with 15.6 a game, and third in yards per game with with just over 275 allowed per game. They also faced some bad quarterbacks, but we saw them change up the scheme and play well. And there was 2 years in a row now that the Dolphins defense in the second half of the year were able to step up, and it became this next man up mentality. Who's going to make a play next? That's what happens to this defense when they're aggressive.
So December 2021, Jerome Baker, defensive player of the month, 16 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. He I don't
know how I missed that. Huh.
So,
well, I mean, Baker has been early in the year, in the first 4 games of the year, I wanted Baker off the field. And then the second half of the year, the guy looks like a perennial Pro Bowl linebacker. So I can't wait for this defense to hit the ground running here next year, because they didn't lose anybody. And now they get to implement into this defense Melvin Ingram, Channing Tindall, Keon Crossan, and a few other different parts. No huge additions, but they didn't need to make any huge additions either. So, Paul, that's going to do it here for our breakdown of the Dolphins defense heading into training camp. The entire team is there on July 26th. I'm Brian Catt, NFL on Twitter. Paul is fanatic_pick. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all of our social media outlets, as well as the Fansided Network and FinFanatic.com. We're going to be here before and after the Dolphins' first preseason game to give you the lowdown on that when the bullets really start flying. And if it's not on the right side and it's not